A big change coming for the Wilmington arts scene. There will be no more DuPont Theater. And we'll tell you about one of the most famous gardens in the world. This is the Delaware Way. Welcome to the Delaware Way. I'm Larry Menti. We are proud to be joined by Mark Fields, who is the executive director of the Grand Opera House located in Wilmington, Delaware. Sir, thank you for being here.
Oh, my pleasure.
And big news for the Grand Opera House. You have purchased, is that the right way to say it? You've purchased the DuPont Theater.
Well, what we've purchased is the business, and we will be leasing the theater itself from the DuPont company, but we're taking over the operation of the long-standing Broadway theater in Wilmington, and it will be a wonderful complement to the work that we do at the Grand Opera House in stand-up comedy and live music. So we're going to kind of have a little bit of everything.
What has been the relationship between the two in the past? Was there any competition?
Well, invariably there's competition when you've got two 1,200-seat theaters 2 blocks away. The theaters are very different in their nature. The DuPont Theater, which we're now going to call the Playhouse on Rodney Square, which is kind of goes back to the historical identity of the space. It was always called the Playhouse. The Playhouse is a Broadway theater. It's got an orchestra, mezzanine, and balcony. It's very high. It's got a stage house so that you can fly scenery in it, and it's designed for doing musicals. The Opera House, which was built 40 years before the Playhouse, is an opera house. The seating is curved around, so it's designed to enhance a live performance and to be able to hear. And we don't have the capability of flying scenery. So the spaces, even though they're the same size, complement one another very well in terms of what they do and what kind of experience they deliver for the audience.
So you've already mentioned you're going to change the name and you're going to change some of the events that happen there, and I want to get deeper into that in a moment, but first let's talk about the transaction. How did it happen?
Well, it was a very complex transaction between two very different kinds of organizations. In Delaware, everybody knows everybody else at one point or another, and so a conversation was started. And
you're not going to get away with the conversation has started. Who started the conversation? Did they approach you? Did you approach them?
Well, Tatiana Copeland, who is one of our biggest arts philanthropists and benefactors here in Delaware, actually approached the DuPont Theater about the idea of the symphony performing at the DuPont Theater. And that conversation led to this kind of more deep conversation where the DuPont came back and they said, well, why don't we talk about this? Why don't we talk about the idea of the Grand running the Delaware Theater? And it was many months of conversation about how exactly that would work, but we saw immediately the potential benefit for the Grand and for the Playhouse audiences in combining those resources so that we didn't become competition for one another.
I get why you've done it. Why did they do it? Do you know?
Well, I'm not a spokesperson for the DuPont, but this is not a core business for them. And so, it's a multinational chemical company. And so it's always been a curiosity. It's because of the family history, of course, of the DuPonts and their long-standing commitment to Wilmington and to community service. But in this modern age, they thought it made more sense to have a theater run by theater professionals.
And how long has this been going on, the talks about buying it?
Several months. I mean, it's been...
That's pretty quick then. It's been...
For the scale of the decision, yes, I guess it was.
So why the decision to change the name? Was that part of the agreement?
It was, well, in a way, it was a condition of the agreement. Because the DuPont company is not going to operate the DuPont Theater anymore, they didn't think that it was appropriate that their name be on it. And then that gave us the opportunity, well, what would be a name that would have resonance in the community? We didn't want to call it Son of Grand or anything like that. We wanted it to have its own separate identity, and we went back to the historical roots of the Playhouse, and that made a lot of sense. But what we like about the approach that we're taking is we have a new spin on it. We are locating it on Rodney Square.
There's no historical value or marketing value to DuPont, were you able to, if you wanted to, keep that name?
Well, the DuPont Theater is actually a relatively new name. They changed it to the DuPont Theater in 2003. Before that, it was the Playhouse.
So the historical value is the Playhouse name.
Exactly.
The marketing value might be DuPont, but were you even able to do that if you wanted to?
It wasn't one of the options, but it wouldn't have been our choice anyway.
Will you still have Broadway plays?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, everything that's going on at the Playhouse now will continue to go on. We'll just have more, and we'll complement it with the kinds of programming that we do at the Grand. We'll complement it with programming that we think would be well received by the audience that attends the DuPont. So one of the things that we're looking at are what are shows that would appeal to that same kind of Broadway sensibility, people that we know like Broadway theater. We might bring in some Broadway stars to perform with the Delaware Symphony. So there are all sorts of options. There are a lot of things on the table. We don't have this all figured out yet.
You're going to have concerts?
Oh, absolutely, concerts.
I mean, pop music?
Oh, sure. I mean, there's a history of pop music at the Playhouse anyway. Broadway isn't all they've done for a number of years.
And you said stand-up comedy?
And stand-up comedy, yes.
And so how big is the venue? How many seats?
The Grand is 1,200 and the Playhouse is 1,240.
So although you can get big stand-ups, you can't get big music acts, can you?
Well, we're not going to compete with a place like Wells Fargo or even with, Verizon Hall in Philadelphia. But a lot of national touring acts stop in Wilmington because it's a convenient location between two other venues they might be playing.
So now you have these two venues, and I want to get into the history, because we're talking mostly about the Playhouse.
Sure.
I want to get into the history of the Grand Ole Opera House in the next segment.
Sure.
But right now, I want to talk about the marketing of these two venues. Here you've just basically doubled your operation, and you're going to have all these new acts. Are you concerned, and you have to be, how concerned are you, and what kind of influence can you have over the reputation that Wilmington's getting? Are you able to still attract people with the negative press about Wilmington and the crime here?
Oh, sure. I mean, it's unfortunate that all of this attention has been focused recently on the negatives in Wilmington, and there certainly are challenges that we're facing. But there's a lot of positive news to talk about Wilmington too, and the problems that we have are concentrated in small parts of the city, and the authorities are well aware of that, and it's not downtown.
But you must hear it.
Oh, sure. I mean, there are folks who are concerned about coming downtown, but when there's an artist that they really want to see, they overcome those concerns. And so the challenge for us is not trying to change people's perceptions of Wilmington directly by saying, no, you don't need to feel that way. It's by giving people the counter examples of there are all sorts of reasons to be proud of Wilmington and to come downtown and experience the good things that are going on, like what happens at the Grand.
And now we're going to move on to the history of the Grand Opera House when we come back on the Delaware Way. Stick around.